There's some controversy today from Pope Francis that has people sort of turning their heads a little bit on this one. The leader of the Catholic Church suggesting that the Lord's Prayer, the best known prayer in Christianity, which is prayed by not thousands, as I said earlier, but 2.2 billion people around the world, may undergo a little bit of an edit. He says the phrase, "lead us not into temptation," suggests that God induces temptation in his followers, and "do not let us fall into temptation" would be more acceptable and closer to the original meaning of the prayer. So who better to sort this out for us than our good friend, Father Jonathan Morris, Fox News religion correspondent.
Thanks,
good to
Martha.
see you, Father
Thank
Jonathan. So I still have a hard time with consubstantial, so I'm a little bit, reluctant to change. What's the meaning
What he's saying is not, I want to change the words of Jesus. Nobody can change the words of Jesus. Jesus existed. Jesus was a historical figure. He said the words of the Our Father, not in English, but in Aramaic. And the best translation we have of the Our Father is the Greek. And then that Greek was translated into so many different languages. And those translations are very different. In English, it says, "lead us not into temptation." But guess what? Jesus didn't speak English. And it's really kind of bad theology, as well as even in the Italian. But, for example, in the Spanish, it says, "no nos dejes caer." In other words, don't let us fall into temptation, if that makes sense. He's saying that the translation isn't very good because God never makes us fall or never leads us into temptation. He actually allows us to be tempted, but we have to make a choice. Does that make sense?
I think so. The Pope is obviously from Argentina, so you know, in his experience, it didn't sound the way it sounds now that he, you know, is dealing with the English language more. I mean, I guess my question is, why did it take so long? If this is wrong, if it doesn't line up with theology, why did it take?
Well, think of it. We pray this all the time. 2.2 billion Christians pray this all the time, and we don't think that God is the one forcing us into temptation. We understand that he allows us to be tempted, but I think all evangelicals, Catholics, mainline Protestant Christians would say God does not lead us into temptation. It's a bad translation, honestly. Go back to the Greek. We don't know exactly what he said in Aramaic in this case, but go back to the Greek, and it's much closer to a lot of translations. That is, don't let us.
Well, what
fall
about the argument that
into
everything
temptation.
comes from God, right?
So evil
whatever
doesn't come from
comes
God.
into your life in different ways was, you know, sort of put there for you to learn a lesson, put there for you.
God never does evil. God never does evil. So God doesn't create evil. Evil is the absence of good, actually. Okay, so God creates everything that's good, and he never leads us into temptation, like, you now be tempted. No, he allows us to experience life, and
So
he
when
also.
is this change happening? When do I have to start changing?
You know what? It's already changed in so many languages. So in other words, our experience is like, oh my gosh, that's such a big deal. But in so many languages, it's much closer to.
I think it's easier than consubstantial. I think I can make this change more easily.
Well, very few
Father
people know
Jonathan,
consubstantial,
but
you do, Martha. Thank you.
Thank you so much.